Good afternoon. I'm Greer Hopkins with Kingsley Gate, and I have Felicia Guity joining me today. She's a senior business executive and PhD who's worked at Google, Amazon, Citrix, and Microsoft. She was the first female African-American promoted to partner GM at Microsoft. She currently is the chief of staff for the team at Google that ensures everyone in the world has reliable access to the website. So good afternoon, Felicia, and welcome. And I really appreciate you joining me today for this conversation as we look at your corner office and your career and journey. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad to be here, Greer.
Mm-hmm. Now, you have had some really big roles over the course of your career journey. What has been high level your recipe for success?
I smile when people say that about me because I feel like my roles are roles that actually allow me to bring forth all the things that I was capable of doing. So if I think about a recipe for success, it'd be like fearlessness. That would be what I would say, because I failed a lot. People don't necessarily remember those as well as they do your successes. I failed a lot, and I've also been fearless about failing. It's okay. And I think that's really what has made me successful, and doing things because I didn't know I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I would define my success.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you failed a lot, and I usually like to start with someone's successes, but you brought it up, and I have to ask, what are some big disappointments in your careers or failures?
Mm-hmm. One that I remember most pronounced is coming when I got my first job as a VP of channels, and I came in like gangbusters, wanting to reform, reshape, transform everything, and I just did it. I mean, I didn't consider the impact it would have on my partners. I didn't consider the impact it would have on my colleagues. And, it was a big blunder. It was complaints coming in left and right. And you can imagine being new and being newly promoted to the VP status, I was horrified. And the first thing I thought to do was apologize, to be vulnerable, to be humble. And I didn't do it unintentionally. I didn't do it intentionally, I should say. I did it out of haste. So that failure cost me a lot, like a few months of unwinding. I can't think how many, but I would say at least 1,000 letters that I purposely signed every single one of them. That was my own personal punishment. But then I went back around and I really engaged and brought others along on my journey. I had to go back and just rewind on that. And that was hard, especially when you're trying to establish yourself as a senior leader.
Mm-hmm. How did you recover from that fumble after those first couple months of cleaning up the mess? What was the rest of your time like at that company?
Well, it got better. I won't say it was easy. I think what people don't put a lot of value in, but they should, is really trying to work with people to understand them and have them understand you. So I spent a lot of time personally championing, other people's work, bringing their work into my work. It's a lot of work to do that, a lot of effort to do it, but it took me, I'd say, a good solid 4 months to get my sea legs, because it was tough. And then I had a leader who was just amazing, and he really did support me in that journey.
Early in your career, were there other mentors that helped you, during your journey? Were there any that come to mind?
Well, I'll say this. Every person who had an impact on my professional journey, I remember them by name and exactly what they taught me. So I have to say this at first. There have been so many people along my journey that have taught me, either whether they were a formal mentor, sponsor, advocate, or champion for me. They taught me things about, I think if I look at a theme thematically, it was how to embrace who you are, your authentic self, and do it in a way that allows your leadership to shine through. I had Jane Ridgely. I have to say her name. She was probably the most profound person who in my career journey, because she taught me to bring me to work. Before her, I had no pictures of my family in my office. I never talked about anything other than the work. And people were having a hard time working with me. She told me I was the smartest person she said she knew, but no one wanted to talk to me, so it didn't help. And it was a very tough conversation. And and it was and you know what she did? Not only did she tell me, she modeled it. That is what made the difference to me. She didn't ever forget my birthday. She sent me pink roses on my daughter's birth. It's just those little things that she taught me that are really important. And I think a few of them is two more that I think I remember. Stu Kazin, he taught me that the opposite of love is not hate. You know, we go into a workplace and if I don't love you, I hate you. Get into a space of indifference allows you to continue to do what you do. And then there's Arthur Snow, who told me familiarity breeds contempt. So you have to really understand how you want to establish the familiar you with the professional you. And we talked a little bit about that, Greer, you and I did.
How have you managed to balance your personal and your work life? What has that been like? Because I know that you've mentioned that you have two kids. What has that journey been like over the course of your career?
It was the hardest thing that I ever had to do. And I will say this, you do things when you love people that you never would have done without loving people. I love my kids to death. So I had to find the ability and be willing to ask for help. And I'd had my neighbors, my friends' moms. I had to learn how to ask for a support system. Mm-hmm. And people think that shows weakness, because the first thing, well, I can do everything. I can't. I could not. And it became painfully clear to me that me trying to do everything good made me do nothing good. It made me do everything okay. So asking for help, understanding what that looked like. I mean, sometimes I just needed somebody to talk to me, just have a glass of wine to tell me I wasn't a bad parent, you know? But asking for help, my kids I found ways to make sure that they could stay in their home. They did have an au pair from the age of 5 to 13, but that was just to keep some balance in their life because I traveled a lot. But just asking for help and asking my kids what they needed, when they needed me, and we had boundaries, like what were the rules that mom had to follow. And they're like, my daughter's like, you have to be in my powder puff football game, So those kind of things is establishing those boundaries, what's important to you, and doing those things and letting other people know you did those things.
Mm-hmm. Finding that community in your personal life, you asked for that help. How did you find your mentors? Did you ask for those mentors? How did you find them?
Well, both ways. Usually, I mean, I was fortunate enough to be in a lot of high potential programs over the course of my career. So I'd get assigned people. But sometimes, and this is what I encourage leaders to do, sometimes I'm in a room with people and they were in a room with me and they said, can we talk? Or I'm in a room with somebody else, like, I like the way they do things. And I asked them, could you spend some time helping me understand how to show up differently or how to manage a room like you do? I did that to a Microsoft executive right before I got promoted to partner. I went to him and said, can I shadow you in your executive meetings? I watch how you are inclusive. I watch how you set the tone, and I need to learn that. He took me for 2 days. I went to every meeting with him. Every single meeting with him. And the other VPs were like, why is she here? He said, she's with me. And it was the best experience of my life. Actually, it got me the job that got me to partner, because I asked some questions and they were like, whoa, she's thinking. So just some of it was me going to people saying, I want to be like you, or I want to pick up some traits that I admire in you. And I'd say that was about 25% of 75% of it was, hey, you come here, I want to talk to you.
Well, now how did you learn that? And we kind of jumped into the middle of your career here, but early on, when you were in high school, when you were headed to college, did you have your parents, your family, were they in corporate roles? Is that something that, you were exposed to early on?
No, absolutely not. That's why I learned that's why I am the way I am, actually. My parents, my entire family, in Muskegon, Michigan, it's a town of 60,000 people, held me up like you would not believe. I was the first person in my family to go to college, ever to get a degree. My parents were married at the age of 16 and 18 because I showed up in the world, but the journey was more about them reinforcing my capabilities so that I would push, and and maintaining my moral compass of doing the hard right, persevering. They all did that. My grandmother, she would always say, "You got this." They would give me books, make me read things, took me to the library. They spent a lot of time cultivating my intelligence, and then making sure that I understood how valuable it was. I was told every day of my life that I was a leader. I don't know any other thing to think about.
Mm-hmm. Now, how did you navigate high school?
Oh.
Well, no one had
you
been
asked
to
hard
college.
questions, Greers. Well, because my parents they did both graduate from high school,
mm-hmm.
but what they didn't have is I went into high school within the sort of the accelerated program, college prep, aptitude high. Wasn't very supported in this as a minority in a high school that was majority. No problem. I was in a majority high school. I was a minority. Oftentimes my teachers would ask me, how did I get there? They were very rude, question my competencies. So nobody helped me, not even my counselors. I said, I want to go to University of Michigan. My counselor said, why don't you go to community college or the business school and be a secretary? I was like, well, why would I do that if I want to go to University of Michigan? Well, that's a lot of money and blah, blah, blah. And so no one guided me. Actually, it became a problem for me because I didn't take the SAT and applied with a high GPA to the University of Michigan, was turned down because I didn't take the SAT. And all people now, my kids, I knew to do that with my kids. My parents didn't know. They never went to college. So that story is an interesting one, in that, my father drove me to the administrative office, told them about all my extracurricular activities, told them that I was an intelligent student. And Greer, nobody really knows this story because no one really asked me. They said, if she takes the SAT in that room over there and passes, she can come. In 17, I took that test all alone, terrified, because one, I wanted to make my father proud. University of Michigan was his dream that he could never achieve because he was taking care of me and my two sisters. I took it, passed it, got scholarships, work study, got everything, and went to the University of Michigan. The hardest moment of my life, because that's when fearlessness can't paralyze you.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned fear a couple of times during this conversation, and, you hear a lot today about women and this concept of kind of imposter syndrome. Yeah. I mean, this is an incredible story about how you got into college. How did you, now imposter syndrome, that's a current phrase, but how did you grapple with that feeling of fear, or that feeling like you don't belong here? Did you have to deal with that? Or, I'd love to understand your thoughts on just imposter syndrome.
Well, I had it more. I mean, I'm out of that phase. I don't have that as often, I would say, if all, at this point in my career. But I think early on, how I dealt with it is there were a couple ways I dealt with it. One is I went back to my family. And, my father would say, stand tall among giants, be your best self. Move forward. You're gonna fail. It's okay. But some of the ways that I adjusted to it is I always had a plan B. See, that's what imposter syndrome does not tell you, right? If you're afraid of something, then what do you do? What is your recourse should this not work out? And I had that feeling when I started with Microsoft. The story is really one of just. You would never believe that my first year at Microsoft, they wanted to fire me. Then I became first black female partner at the company. They felt like I didn't have their DNA. That's just what I was told. And you know what I told them? I said, I'm not quitting. If I don't have your DNA, you're going to have to fire me, but I'm getting up every day and I'm coming into the office and I'm doing Felicia. And that is what I learned. The imposter syndrome is the fact that you have to embrace Be the hero in your own story. Tell people who you are. And as I was thinking this, Greer, I drove home in tears. I mean, I was strong and bold in front of the HR director. And I said, what are you afraid of? And I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to feed my kids. And so I had a plan B. If they fired me, I would send my kids to my mother's. I would rent my house and I'd work at the Safeway grocery store. Fear went away. When you have a plan that allows a fallback strategy, that doesn't seem very appealing to people. But what I was telling myself is that you can make money. And you were looking for a job when you got this job. So let's just have a bridge strategy.
Well, in your experience now, what makes a great leader? We're talking a little bit about soft skills, Hill, but are there any soft skills that you think are really important in a strong leader?
Empathy is one of the biggest ones. EQ is really important. I think empathy is big. And EQ are big. Both of those are big because it forces you to see the world from somebody else's eyes, right? I'm challenged a lot with some people's profiles. I mean, everybody doesn't like everybody, but sometimes I sit back and say, why is that person the way they are? I mean, what is it? What is the environment? Is it the environment? Is it their upbringing? Is it their work style? And then sometimes you just have to extend a little grace. You just gotta, I told another leader just last week, they were having an interpersonal dynamic that wasn't working. I said, why don't you stop reacting and respond? Respond to their concerns. Don't react and become defensive because that's a different motion. And the leader said, and that's how I see things. I think as a leader, we have to show empathy. We have to have a level of EQ. And EQ has self-awareness. What do you do? I know how I act when I'm under stress. I'm very directing, very decisive. I don't listen. I know. So, managing your own emotion and understanding the emotions of others and the triggers that you see, when you trigger people, So I think those are critical. Really critical. And we'll see more of that. People go, EQ, empathy. No, it's important.
What is a time where you've had to kind of call upon your own empathy when you were a leader to navigate a situation?
Usually those are required in those when crucial conversations like performance. I gave a person a performance rating, a 25-year Microsoft veteran, a 0 money and 0 equity. Conversation was tough. Mm-hmm. And I blocked out 2 hours. And the empathy component of this is I took every business objective that they were held accountable for that year, and I went through it one by one with very detailed and specific, communications around what you did, what you could have done, and what great looked like, right? Did you do okay? Sometimes you did good enough. And that is a little bit of not what's expected. They were director level. Sometimes you did not meet, right? And watching that, that level of respect and precision around, behaviors, outcomes, expectations. I found that conversation it was probably the hardest one I prepared for. I prepared for weeks because I did have notes. But what I learned after that was I got to thank you. Thank you for respecting me. Thank you for honoring what I did do. Thank you for being clear on what I didn't do. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to think about, because I didn't say, hey, this is resulting in us firing you. I said, now you're at a critical crossroads. You're either going to be on a performance plan where you're going to have to overcome some of these things I've outlined, or you have to figure out your next career step. He figured out his next career step. But before he did that, he did go to my manager and say he never felt so respected in his life. So I know those moments. I've heard a lot of that. Actually, my daughter heard a panel at Microsoft where a woman said, I was terrified. And I talked to a woman called Felicia Guity, and she told me I was worthy. I said, I just took a little time. And my daughter texted me and said, they're talking about you, Mom. And that was a shining moment for her, because I tell her all the time, you're good enough. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we just need to hear that.
Over the course of your career, how have you kind of developed your own brand? How would you define your brand, and how did you build it? Was it intentional?
Oh, yes, definitely. Everything I do is intentional. And that is what I want to tell people is be intentional. It's not, I mean, I saw an article yesterday about this actually. It's not, who you are isn't about perfection. It's about intention. It's not being perfect, it's about being intentional. So I always would position myself in the in as a very inclusive, decisive, and transformative leader. And those are the words I use to describe myself. See, people don't understand the power of language. If you tell people choose words that they're comfortable with to describe other people. I always set the tone. I said, let me tell you a little bit about me. I pride myself in being inclusive, decisive, and transformative. And I can tell you a little bit about that if you're interested. I learned that from an executive coach. She told me, she said, you have to. And so I did that for like 6 months straight, and then it became my brand. Well, Felicia's, she's very inclusive, or she's very decisive, or she's transformative, and she can tell you examples of those things. People need to figure out what they want to be known for and do it. Mm-hmm. And I want to be known for those things. And some people, well, they want to be known for it, but they're not, they don't embrace it and put it out there, because if you do, you got to live up to it.
You mentioned an executive coach. Was that something that was given to you through work? Was that something you found on your own? How did that come about?
Well, I've had two or three, and I asked for them. There are key inflection points in everyone's career where they can get where they have blind spots. And as I look back on it, it was every blind, it was always me getting to the next level. It was right before, because what people don't understand, what got you here don't get you there. So you might have some sort of transactional skills. I was very good at the how, but I hadn't demonstrated that I knew the why. And that is what gets you to senior levels. I told one of my employees, they were like, well, this is how you do it. I said, people who know how will always work for people like me who know why. Always. And he was like, got it. Because the how, because I'm asking why. So it appears like I find myself in situations where I'm not adding the leadership value I want. I'm not being recognized or included in the leadership level I want. And I go get coaches to say, help me find my blind spots.
Mm-hmm. What is a blind spot that you managed to overcome?
Teaming. Okay. I continue to struggle with that. It's not intentional. So we got to the root cause. I don't come across as a team player because I'm an introvert. Okay.
You're an introvert.
I am an introvert. And I've been tested over and over and over. And introverts think. So they don't spend a lot of time, trying to figure out ways to be socially engaging. They just don't. And it's not personal. So I had to build a persona of engagement, right? Here are my team members. How do I engage? Do I engage with them at lunch? Do I offer for a cup of coffee walk? Before I go into meetings with them, do I rehearse some lines that I need sound bites that I need to make sure I hit? I did all of that. I continue to do all of that. I was in a meeting last week with 21 other VPs and 2 sets of them. And I had to work that. By the end of the day, I was exhausted. But I have to work really hard, because if I don't, then I seem standoffish, reserved, and I'm just thinking. So I go in, I have to do a lot of pre-work to be, so I can say, hey, Tom, listen, I know this about you. And, this is how I want to build on your thinking around this. So it takes a little bit of work, but I do it.
Well, what has been the biggest success that you feel that you've had? What's been the biggest success, and what's been the biggest lesson you've learned from that success?
I think my biggest success across the board, regardless, but I think I see it more with Justin and Lauren, my 2 kids, is role modeling worthiness. role modeling self-acceptance. I mean, I get a lot of calls, emails even, where people said, I saw you here and I walked away with it. She told me, so what if I fail? Or she told me, well, she said I was worthy and I went out and I quit my job and did something different. She told me that I had potential and why was I worrying about other people? I mean, I get a lot of those. I have one that I got. He went from being a project manager at Microsoft to being a CMO at a startup. And he called me and he said, the first interaction with me, and what I said to him is, why are you in this role? You're much greater. You have much more capacity. I don't understand. I told him I didn't understand. And he was like, well, I have to, if I can prove myself at Microsoft. I said, why you got to prove yourself at Microsoft? And he went to this job, doubled his salary. And then, I actually went and celebrated with him. I flew to Chicago and celebrated with him. So you see what I mean? If you going from a product marketing person to a CMO at and I mean, it's not a small company. He was not living up to his potential. And he said, what if I can't do it? I said, you'll find another job. You'll find a job you can do.
So, one word in this narrative, your narrative that hasn't come up is honesty, but you're giving very much unfiltered feedback to people. You're being transparent. Is that something that you learned, or is that something that is that you developed over time?
I learned it. I developed it. I had it, but I developed the sort of thinking around how to use it. I get that a lot, even, as a newer executive at Google, they say you're quite transparent. I hear that quite a lot. But now I couch it, and, I pride myself in transparency and clarity. So let me tell you what I'm thinking. Mm-hmm. But I found that if I don't like, I didn't understand, or I don't like people not being able to make an informed decision, because I felt that way before. And I go back and I revisit the conversation and go, well, this is what I meant. And I will give you a trick. One of the things I have told this to, I would say, if it has been 100 people, that'd be too few. I said, when you are not clear, when there's not the level of transparency you need, ask this one very critical question. What would you do if you were me? Because the person answers from their frame of reference, right? So they will answer with the knowledge they have in their head. That has unblocked so many, what are you talking about moments for me. And people have come back to me and said, oh my God, my manager told me I needed to find a new job. He didn't think I was going to be great in this. My trajectory wasn't good. Or he told me to do this and I probably would get promoted. People respond from their frame of reference. So no, transparency is something I learned as I told you, I'm direct. So I'm directing. So to be directing, you have to be informative of why you do what you do. And I thought, and so I picked it up as a value, as a leadership value.
Mm-hmm. Has being direct and transparent ever gotten you in trouble, and how did you get past it?
All the time. Is that a joke? Is that a trick question?
I don't know. As it was coming out of my mouth, I started to laugh.
Yeah, well, the thing is, and actually, I ask the person who's challenged one question about directness. I said, okay, you said I'm direct. I can work on that, but it's a behavior that I need you to help me, work through. When they tell you you're direct, ask them if it's the content or the delivery. Mm-hmm. Because if it's the delivery, I can work on that. That's a behavior. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're not comfortable with my tone. You're not comfortable with my facial expressions. I can work on that. But the content is the content, right? It is what it is. So I break that down. And then the other part about, the transparency, I said, would you rather wonder what I'm thinking or know what I'm thinking? And if you rather wonder, then I won't do this again. And, people go, well, I want to know what you think. And I said, so we're good. We've covered the direct thing and we've covered the transparency.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had those conversations a lot.
Now, what would you say is the most kind of dangerous behavior or trait that you've seen derail someone's career?
Associating their success or failure on the way they look. And let me be very clear on this. I hear a lot. I mean, a part of it is, I hear a lot of I got a couple of underrepresented minority things I could say about myself, but, saying I would have done better. I mean, they don't like me because I'm a woman, or because I'm Black, I didn't get a chance, or because I'm not in the boys club, I can't do this. I mean, just hinging your lack of success or acceleration solely on how you look or your social economic status. I mean, it's the world. That's what the world looks like. I mean, I can't say it enough. And it's unfortunate. There's solidarity everywhere, by racial groups, by gender, but it's across the board. I think that can derail you. If you look back and figure out, there's a level of engagement that we've all learned. How do I make who I am fit into this environment that I'm in? And if you can't, then that's not the environment you should be in. And I think there's just agility that's required for everybody, no matter what you look like. I mean, I'm sure white men and Black men have a different way that they interact, all of us. So I think that's a big derailer for me. When people come to me and say, well, and I had this woman, if I wasn't a woman, the way I talk wouldn't be a big deal. I said, really? You think everybody who's rude, men who are rude get included? And I mean, I'm just trying to break it down to the simplest common denominator. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying bias doesn't happen, but you can't make that the sole reason for your lack of achievement.
Mm-hmm. With the, particularly the last couple of years, there has just been even more of a push for organizations to be more diverse. What are ways that you try to be inclusive, and, what are ways that you think companies can work to be more diverse?
I think one of the things is that, I think the fundamental challenge in corporate America, just because, as I was just on an org health review yesterday, is that we rely heavily, Google prioritizes internal references over applicants, okay? Mm-hmm. Microsoft does the same thing. Microsoft gets 60,000 resumes a year. I'm sure Google gets equivalent, right? And so does Amazon, all of them. If you're a reference internally, you get first priority. So you go into a company like Google that's probably, I know the Microsoft numbers because I was there the longest, who probably has 78% male. Mm-hmm. And you want to know why you don't have female working there? When you got a system that says refer people like you, you wonder why your numbers aren't right. At Google, it's a lot. I'm not sure I understand how their framework works, but it's the same phenomena. I will tell you that there are not many women that look like me and have the position of authority I have. Mm-hmm. I've only seen 2. And that's across the whole entire organization. The women of color. I mean, and that's the other. I mean, they think, if I hire women, then I fix my diversity issue. But there's the ethnic, there's able-bodied and unable-bodied, and so it's. I think fundamentally is that the referral process in a majority environment will continue to perpetuate majority hiring. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think that there's certainly something to be said for being able to backdoor reference people. But, the referral process, the way you're describing it, makes it sound a little bit like legacies at elite colleges.
It's sort of like that. I mean, I'm certain people like, okay, so Ben, my manager, I mean, Ben, God love him. Who would he refer? I mean, he has people that he's gone to Stanford with that look like him, that does the same thing he does. He got positional authority. If he says, hey, get them in the system, they're going to get them in the system. Ben isn't like that. So Ben does not use his positional authority in that way, and I respect him for it. But a lot of people do. There's a couple people that work for him that got into the organization as vice presidents because of that, and they all look alike, if you know what I mean.
Well, and you know, this is something that's been, you know, the conversation of women and people of color in tech. I mean, across every company, every tech company right now is having this discussion. And in technology, you know, there aren't always a lot of women. Just, you know, how do we get more women and people of color into technology and into roles of leadership? I mean, I know that's a big and loaded question, but I'd love your take on it.
Well, I think there's a couple ways. I think bring people into the room. I mean, you bring the talent in. I tend to do that. I bring people into, you know, I read someplace that you want to work for somebody who will bring you into a room of decision makers. You know, so I'm in the room last week with my manager with a bunch of senior vice presidents. You know, the first thing one of the things I was asked when I was invited to the meetings, are you going to take notes? I said, absolutely not. Nope. And I did that because if I'm going to be the room, I got to show up. So I think the thing is that there are a lot of women. I mean, we don't invite them in. I will take a mentee to a meeting with me. I will take a mentee to include a mentee in a process where there's a lot of, I brought all of my staff into all of this, up to the VP meeting, and you know that they had never been exposed to everything from my technical program manager to my strat operations guy, just to hear how that dynamic plays out. And you got to start bringing people into the room, and all of them are diverse. You know, none of them were like, you know, I Indian background, Israeli. I brought everybody in, and they were like, it was very, Felicia, thank you for the inclusion, including them in the moments that count. You know. And they don't do that. Every time I've been successful, I told you, people brought me in the room. They brought me in the room. Even if I just sat there and listen and watch, I got a sense for how to do what they do. And that's what people want. They need to see how it's done. If you are a minority and you came from a family like I did, my parents couldn't tell me how to act in a meeting. Unfortunately, they could tell me how to be a kind person, but they can't tell me how to navigate and lead a room. So it's a tough problem, and I think the unconscious bias is the underrepresented minority or person of difference able to step up. And my answer to you is absolutely, absolutely. And if there aren't, then what's lost if you gave them a chance? That was what I would say.
Now, Felicia, you know, we've talked a lot about, you know, your career and your journey, but being in leadership roles can be stressful. I mean, how do you like to unwind? How do you like to step back at the end of the day or the beginning of the day and take some time for yourself?
It is stressful. And I think people don't understand how it's, and I've seen my colleagues deal with stress in different ways, but I personally deal with stress through physical exercise. I go for a walk and, you know, walk my dog. I talk to Tito, that's my Australian Labradoodle. I do Pilates, a religious Pilates person. Actually, I started Pilates when I got a divorce. It was a new form of exercise for strength building. I go to the gym every morning at 6 a.m. Now, people say, oh, you're disciplined. But if I don't, it helps balance my endorphins, right? I wake up in high energy mode. It levels me out. And when I don't go, I find myself, you know, overthinking things. But you have to find that thing that brings you peace, that centers you. I mean, I love, I knit, cross stitch. I mean, those things are all mind mapping activities. People don't know that. I even taught my kids to do it because it helps you do critical thinking. So those are things I do. I mean, I am an avid player of Words with Friends on my phone. It's sort of like the Scrabble on the phone. I do that constantly too. But basically, it's about finding a way to step away from the day-to-day noise and just do things that are mind-numbing, basically. Knitting, cross-stitching, going to the gym. And then I find the friends that I can call and say, am I crazy? But this is what I'm thinking. My best friend, I still talk to my college roommate at least 2 times a week. And we laugh. And I say, you know me, am I being picky? So yeah, you're being picky. And just having those people that can tell you when you're sort of a little off size, and so that's how I deal with stress.
Now, two final questions here, kind of in closing. The first is, what is some great leadership advice that you've gotten, or advice that you wish someone had given you when you were starting out in your career?
Well, two things. One is that they should have told me the importance. I mentioned this, the importance of networking. As an introvert, I would guess, the first 10 years of my life just thinking doing good work was going to get me to the next level. I see that all the time. I do a great job. Yeah, okay. And they were like, well, I should be promoted. Well, a little bit of the promotion and acceleration in your career is all around. They know you know how to do the work. So if someone had told me, continue to focus on delivering outcomes, however, be able to tell the narrative around that outcome and getting people also talking about the narrative around your outcomes. That is what builds a quick. I mean, my career accelerated pretty fast, but it wasn't me that was doing the talking. I just was fortunate enough for people to talk on my behalf. But had I known that, I would have built a branding statement right out of the gate. And I teach my daughter to do that. I talk to my son about doing that. I mean, create that narrative around your ability to do how, your ability to understand why, and how you execute on that. I think that's so lost because we so focus on the how. I mean, and people come up, well, I got a degree in accounting. I go, did you know that Amy Hood, the CFO of Microsoft, is an English major? Who cares, right? Who cares? Amy's a great CFO, but she's not an accountant. She's not a finance major. So people get hung up in the titles of what they've done. Yeah, okay. You're a marketing major. That's not who you are. That's what you know. And they need to understand that.
Now, what is your superpower?
Oh, I think, you and I've talked about this, I think, just in some of the interactions we had, but I think it's grit. I want to say it's grit. I mean, I can persevere in the most stressful of situations, and I've had them. I went through a divorce that no one knew I went through for 5 years. I just have the ability to show up like I have it together and can do this. And I have the ability to persevere through a lot of disappointment. I mean, would I tell people in this session that I've had disappointment? I have, because in some of the most profound, I talked about one, but most profoundly, disappointment that's couched in what I see as perception and not facts is really hard to deal with. Like, well, we didn't pick you because, some random something that I'm not capable of, lack of capability or but if you look at my track record, everything I've done, I've been successful. So what's your question? Some of those soft rejections are harder than the ones like, we just need somebody with 20 years of experience. You know what I mean? It's harder. And it's very difficult not to become defensive and saying you just picked on me. But I go back and say, okay, if I don't have this, I'll get it. I'll learn it. And the next time I have this come up, I'll be ready.
Well, Felicia, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us today. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this and being very, very direct with our audience. And thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Greer, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.